Excellent. Yes, tomorrow is when Mercury goes back into forward motion, so that's a good sign. I think it's on the 11th, got a full moon, and then the 21st Mercury comes out of retrograde shadow, and I think the 27th, well, the 27th of January, I think it is, all the planets are then in forward motion, which is quite unusual. So there's definitely this feeling like a locomotive has had the parking brake released, and the wheels are starting to turn, and it should be some interesting spectacles to see, not least in the external with the stories that will be put about, because we're in this realm of duality, so if there's a bloom of the light, you will see a reaction from the dark, which balances it out. But just pay no attention to it, observe it, but just don't put any feeling into it. They are just stories after all. They're all designed to derail, keep us in that lower fear state. That's it. It's a rise above it, see it for what it is, just bullshit stories to try and coerce us into, oh, I've got to be frightened of this or frightened of that, and that's going to get me, this is going to get me. So you're in that fight, flight, freeze or fawn, and if you overlay the F's, you get the swastika out of them, if you overlay them the right way, which matches Polaris, interestingly. Hi Karen, I've just made a 16-minute video, but I'll sort of go over it again in response to what Gary mentioned about the cemetery, or cemetery. In the USA it's ARY, because it's a 19th century or 18th century split with English. A good example of that would be, you can find it on YouTube, put in Canada's Roswell. Forget about all the UFOs and things, but just listen to the way two guys that witnessed these unidentified flying objects, because that's all they are, they're just unidentified. Could be anything. Doesn't necessarily mean aliens from outer space or any of that nonsense. But it's the dialect that was coming out. I recognise elements of, oh, that's pure Devon, that's pure Sussex, that sounds Irish. Just certain words they say. Because I'd always thought that Canadians would sound just like Americans, but certainly on the Newfoundland end of Canada, the sort of eastern side, it's preserved the rural dialects of the British Isles, effectively. Anyway, to the matter of cemetery or cemetery, what is it actually showing? Because as you and Gary demonstrated, when you looked on Google the first time, you're just finding the ERY ending, and it's always been spelt that way, and then you've looked again and shown on screen that there's plenty of examples of ARY. That is just the universe showing how the nature of this reality is holographic and how things can change. And of course it has that added ingredient of some will swear adamantly it's this way, another group will say no, it's never been that way, they've got no recollection of it. It's basically another potential divide and conquer if people don't keep a check on their emotions and things. But look at what it's actually showing as well. Cemetery or cemetery. What happens? It's a dead end. It's basically showing that you, like in this physical reality, if there's a hole and you sort of overbalance, and you'll find you fall into it. That's what rabbit holes are, and they can be anything from a subconscious inner knowing that there's something not quite right with this reality, but taking the quick fix route of, I'll drink alcohol and get blind drunk and I won't have to think about it. But of course it comes back. It doesn't actually go away, it's burying the head in the sand and not facing what the inner gut feeling is telling you. So cemetery, it's just saying rabbit holes are a dead end. It's just a way of showing the nature of this reality. I mentioned to you the other day about the word aisle. Bit of etymology time now. So what word am I actually saying when I say aisle? Am I saying I will in its abbreviated form? Am I talking about Isle, like a land area, like Isle of Man, Isle of Wight, Isle of Skye, and so on? And of course, from that you get island or island. Now, why isn't the S pronounced in the word? Why is it even in there? It makes no sense. But when you see it as island, it sort of opens up an aspect to it. There's also aisle with an A in the front, which can be in a supermarket. You go down the aisles, you've got an aisle in the church, you've got normally a north and a south aisle, which are, you've got the main arches of the more central part of the nave where the congregation sit in pews, because you're like fish out of water, and what happens with fish out of water unless they're packed with ice? They stink, so it's pew. And then the extensions to the church on either side are known as aisles as well. So that's another variation on what is exactly the same sound, but the spelling of the words creates a different aspect, as it were. And it's funny how the A and the S in that spelling of aisle are both silent. But I feel there's also a clue when you're going down the aisle. It's also the abbreviation of I will, so it's talking about the will, the intention. So for example, in a marriage ceremony, the bride walks down the aisle. We don't want to go too far into the whole ritual thing of that, but I think that makes the point with the word aisle and how many different interpretations it can have, just as the same as the word presents. Are we talking about birthday presents? Are we talking about like a supernatural presence, being in the present? Are you presenting yourself as a presence in the present, as a present, for example? It's actually the same sound, but look how the word changes. And you can also emphasize it in the way you say it to bring out more of the flavor of a particular sound of a word. Excuse me. So the other thing I mentioned today is how to unlock a door inside yourself. So get yourself into a fairly upright chair. Switch off from all the external worries about anything. Just focus on the present moment of being in that chair. And you start with your feet, start with the toes, tense up the toes and release, do that 10 times, then do it with your ankles, do it with the calves, your thighs. Just work right up the body, put your arms out, tense your muscles and release, tense and release, and do it about 10 times, and you'll get yourself into quite a sort of relaxed state, hence being in a more upright chair. Because it can lead to a danger of just falling asleep, which is not the intention. But then the next step is to picture a traffic light in your mind. And you ask a test question, so red would indicate no, green would indicate yes. So something like, is the Pope Catholic? And visualize the traffic light changing to green. Very straightforward. Now the next step to this. Ask a question that you feel you don't know the answer to. And don't think it, don't consciously do anything to the traffic light, just observe the traffic light. Now if in your mind's eye you see that traffic light change to a green or an amber aspect or to a red aspect, obviously you've got to phrase the questions as for yes and no answers. But there comes that point where I didn't consciously change it. I'm not visually, with my mind, changing that traffic light from the lower conscious level, but I am witnessing that traffic light change. It's almost like a supernatural, may seem like out of body, that something else is controlling that traffic light with the answers. It's actually your higher self or your spirit guide, which is the same thing. But if you can master that, some of you may get it first time, some of you may need to try it several times. The point is to don't be half-hearted. You've got to go all in and see it through. You've created the desire to do something, now you've got to follow it through. And if you do that and you see it through to the end, you will experience this, which will unlock something inside you that you can now talk to yourself and get the answers. It's basically backing up what the gut feeling is telling you. What we would call pain, like physical pain, say a bruise or a cut, is not actually pain. It's just the body letting you know that it's repairing, which it does automatically with no conscious thought, because the body is an organic being that is just basically like a housing for us as a soul spirit to occupy, to go through this experience of being in this material realm. And of course there is no pain, no gain. If you suppress the pain, you're denying yourself of being able to see the contrast in the pleasure. So some things in the moment might seem awful, but time is a healer, and if we can look at the events and things, normally it happens in retrospect. You can look back at something and say, oh yeah, there was a lesson in that, I saw it, I can now see it, as it were. Sometimes it could be months, maybe years later, the penny will drop and it'll all, through a sequence of events, individual to all of us, it would just suddenly come. It's like, that's why that happened. We're here to have an experience between birth and death. But death is just the doorway, because there's also the other side. Where there is a yin, there is a yang. So whilst you have life as we call it, and to know it is life, must therefore imply that you've already had the experience of from death to birth, which is the other side. Death is really all just separation of spirit from matter. Interestingly, the human body contains destructive forces within it, which your second body, because we're basically like Russian dolls, your etheric body maintains and keeps everything functioning. But there comes a point where the etheric body can do no more, and then the body goes into its natural state, which is to decay and disintegrate. So the only time you ever really see a human, it would be a human being in the physical sense, is that from that point of death for the next 3 days, where it goes through a shutdown process. That's its most human, natural, physical aspect, because it's now devoid of the soul spirit, so it just does what it's meant to do and return to nature, as it were, and so the cycle of life carries on. There are many that think they are a physical body, but no, it's just like as if you were to get into a car. You don't become the car. You're the driver in the car. So think of the body like a car. It's a vehicle to get you about in this physical reality. Or you couldn't experience the physical reality without a physical body. It's part of this reality. But ultimately comes the realization that this is probably the greatest interactive game that you can ever play. Everything is within. If you seek without, you go without. So the answers are always to go within. So if we take the covenant, that is also an inside job. But the covenant is a promise that you make to yourself. Whether you stick to it or whether you break it, that's entirely up to you. That's your own responsibility. If you make a covenant, then you need to stick to it and see it through to the end. But what you find is, by doing that, by setting boundaries of what you allow into your reality from the external, by setting that boundary, what I've found is that the reality itself changes around me and becomes more positive. It relies also, of course, on not focusing on worries and concerns, just using the eyes for what they're intended for, which is to observe. But if we start focusing our attention, particularly on the negative things, we're basically magnetic and we draw the very thing we don't want towards us because we're putting our energy in that direction. This is the reason you have this continuous 24/7 bombardment of stories. Things that are allegedly going on in the world, but we can't individually confirm unless you happen to be in that area. So you're relying on coming from a two-dimensional source through a screen. So effectively that is just gossip and hearsay is a heresy. But you don't have to import any of these things into your reality. You get it's like you said before, Karen, switch off the TV. It's switched off from anything negative. It really does change the reality. Which reminds me, I made a video about 2 years ago. I happened to be in Motherwell in Scotland at the time, and there was said to be an earthquake, and it was all over these American YouTube news channels about this earthquake in Scotland. And I said, well, I actually happen to be pretty near where this is supposedly taking place, and I've not felt a thing. So I'd suggest you check where your sources of your information, because I can assure you it's totally wrong. But what came out of the video that I made on it, I got a comment from a lady on the east coast of the United States, and she described that she lived in a very close, small area, basically the size of 2 football pitches. Now, some people there did feel tremors, while another group didn't. What it came down to was the state of the individual. So, for example, if they were in the fear state and, oh, the government's got my best interests, I will go along with whatever they suggest, they felt the earthquakes. Those that are not in that fear state, and those that were employed in such things as working with nature in garden centres and the like, didn't feel it either. So I feel that is a huge indication of the holographic nature of this reality, why some people will feel and sense certain things while others don't, because we're basically magnetic. Whatever frequency you tune yourself to, the external will match that frequency, not the other way round. That comes from the suggested scripts of, we want you to feel this way, so if you believe this story, you're going to feel this way, and you're going to have all these worries, and it's going to bring you into that lower vibration. So effectively, you become the food source of something that is basically like an energy vampire. But it comes down to that saying about, oh, I couldn't eat that, that's too rich. So if you're on a higher vibration, you won't be affected by these things, because you will be on a higher vibration that this energy vampire thing would find very difficult to digest and harvest. So just like a magnet, because you're on a positive vibration, so you're on the positive polarity, just like two magnets, if you put the wrong ends together, they will repel. So you'll repel that negative script that's being offered, and you won't be affected by it. It really is that simple to navigate your way through this reality. It's what is known as repentance, which basically means having a radical change of mindset. Things make an impression on us, but what happens when you make an impression on yourself? When you impress upon yourself, you impress onto the subconscious a state that the external will say is not true, but internally you can overwrite that. The subconscious does not know the difference. It's totally impartial. It's totally neutral. So whatever you're feeling, it will just serve you up more of that feeling, because it takes it as an instruction that that is what you wish for. So it all comes down to having an internal dialogue within oneself. Our thoughts do change this reality. They change our physicality. It takes you out of that state of dis-ease when you are at ease inside oneself. So I hope that gives an explanation that hopefully will make sense to many. And I invite anybody to try this, because you're testing it for yourself, because the only way you're going to know is to go through the experience. In this physical reality, I can give you a perfect example. You can read 100 books on how to drive a car, but you're never going to know until you sit in that driving seat and put into practice what you've learned. Because you're not going to know what the brake pedal feels like. You're not going to know what the accelerator or the clutch pedal feels like. You're not going to know if it's got understeer or oversteer, if the brakes are sharp. All these type of things. The only way you're going to know it is to go through the experience. And we're in basically a vehicle, which is the physical body, to go through these experiences. And just like driving, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. You'll reach an acceptable standard, to use that driving analogy, where yes, this person is competent enough to be able to drive. This is just a spiritual version of it that's going on within oneself. You are your own teacher and you are your own student. You are the instructor and you're also the pupil, to use that driving analogy again. Wow, that's 22 minutes and 22 seconds. That sounds like or looks to be numerically a good place to stop. So hopefully that has made sense.